Hey guys, welcome back to another video. Today I've got my good friend Lofty Fulton with me today.
Hey, Haim.
Amazing voiceover artist, and he's released a new book, Lofty My Life in Short, which is an absolute amazing book, by the way.
Oh, thank you. That's very kind.
And just got a few questions to ask you about your book.
Hmm.
So one of the first things you mentioned, Lofty, was mainly about your family and in particular your maternal grandmother and the fact that she would treat your older sister in one way and you in another,
Mm,
particularly with her getting pocket money and you didn't. So what was
mm.
going on there?
Um, my grandmother, my older brother, there's four of us in the
Yeah,
family, just to give those who um haven't read the book like you and I have. I'm the youngest of four children. So I'm the baby of the family, and I'm the only one who was born in the family with a disability. I have dwarfism. So my grandmother was, as my older brother, who's the eldest of the four of us, or
mm,
oldest of the four of us, describes it. She's a sociopath, or she was a sociopath. She was a very nasty kind of woman. She didn't just do that to me and my family, but my mother's sisters, her, their children all had a favorite as far as my grandmother was concerned,
yeah,
and the
mm,
others were sort of left out in the cold. Yeah, she was just a nasty piece of work, unfortunately, and yeah. But when you're a little kid and you're getting pocket money, and you see your sister getting a lot more pocket money or a lot more as a gift from your grandmother, you somehow translate that to having something to do with your worth or your value, and that's how I interpreted that in my young mind at the time. Since I've grown up, I know that, of course, is not the case, but that's kind of just. Does that answer the question for you? Does that kind
yeah,
of make sense?
yeah. Just
Yeah.
and I mean, I listened to the episode you did with the Mojo Radio show.
Hmm.
Um, and I was just kind of curious there about with family life and particularly your grandmother, but that answers it perfectly. No worries. Um,
Excellent.
Now you did mention about getting bullied a lot in school, in particular, getting called
Hmm.
that certain name.
Yes.
Why do you think they, you know, because it seems like a silly name now, probably when you think about it. But how did it kind of
Oh,
when that happened?
yeah. At the time, and like you say, it seems like a silly name now when you do look back on it. And the name you're referring to, of course, is Pumpkinhead, which is when I went into year
Yeah,
seven, the first year of high school. Because high school is generally a lot bigger than the primary schools we all go through.
yeah,
And high schools are made up of a number of different primary schools in the area. These are kids who had never encountered me previously. And this particular kid just decided he was going to bully me. And unfortunately, at that time, he decided that the name he was going to call me was Pumpkinhead. And whilst, as you say, it seems like a silly name now, back then it just hurt so much because, like anything, I suppose, um, Hamish, is it's the power of words and the intent with
yeah,
which they're said. Because uh, let's take an example. Let's say everyone could quite easily understand because Pumpkinhead's sort of like off the radar a little bit, but say referring to someone as gay, for argument's
yeah,
sake. Um, and I will say right from the outset, there is no issue with anyone being gay. There's nothing wrong with that, in my opinion, whatsoever.
yeah,
But in certain sectors of society, people are vilified simply for being gay. So if somebody is gay and somebody who has an issue with people being gay is calling that person gay, it's the intent with which it's said. It's meant to hurt. It's meant to be hurtful. Whereas there are those within perhaps the gay community who can call themselves gay. You know, like for instance, um, another way of putting it would be my very dear friends can refer to me as being short. You know, like it's or call me a name in fun, and I know it's in fun. But if it's someone I don't know and they're referring to me as being short with a horrible name, then I know the intent there is to be hurtful, and that's why it does become hurtful.
Yeah. And speaking of when you were talking about nothing wrong with being gay, I totally agree. Like even my oldest sister is gay, so
Mm.
I can totally
I
agree.
have many dear friends who are gay, but unfortunately, and you may have seen it with your older sister, there are people in society who don't agree with people being gay for whatever reason, and
Yeah.
they vilify them. They make it wrong to be that way. So you know,
And
yeah.
speaking of that, Naomi, you mentioned one time you were in one of your classes and the you were talking about bullying, and the teacher asked for an example, and you put your hand up.
Uh, yeah, yeah. I will, Hamish, I'll never forget that day. Um, and a lot to do with that is duty of care, as in, um, we're talking, gosh, I was in year 7 at the time. I turned 56 in April of this year, April 2020. So I was 11. We're talking 45 years ago, and I still remember that as clear as day, because it is a case of, in my mind, again in my young mind, it was her saying to the bullies, "It's okay to treat him that way."
Mm,
She was siding with the bullies. I'll never forget it. I got invited to uh, an educators conference earlier this year, or was it late last year? Following the release of the book, they asked me to come and speak, and I shared that story at the educators, and you, the whole room just gasped, and a number of teachers came up during the break afterwards and said, "I would like to sincerely apologise on behalf of teachers that happened to you, because it should never have happened." So,
and even when I read it in the book, pardon my language here, but I just thought to myself, I mean, how the fuck can a teacher, say that to?
exactly. Well, if we're going to go there, what she did was fucked. Absolutely. There's, and unfortunately, I was not able to name her by name. I would love to, so that she, if she ever read the book, could see her name in print
Yeah.
going, "You did this," and knowing here you are 45 years later, still having that scarred impact on my life. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't think about it every day, of course, but it left a pretty big scar. So, yeah.
And Lofty, when you were, about to turn 18 and you had left school, you mentioned a little bit about, you know, when you're in those teen years of wanting to find love and, find a
Hmm.
partner. And you went through quite a few stages of, having a shaken marriage, and now, you got a
Hmm.
lovely partner with you now. So how kind of did you go through that and get through that of finding the love you found now?
A lot of it had to do with my breakdown, which I had in
Yeah.
2000, 2013. Yeah, 2013. So 7 years ago. Started just before my birthday in April. I'd always, it's, you know that you obviously know the term benefit of hindsight, and
Yeah.
hindsight is 2020 vision, as in you can look back on something perfectly and go, "Oh, had I have done this differently," but when you're in it at the time, you don't know. I did not realize that all my life I'd been an anxious person, and anxiety is something that is only over recent years, along with depression and other forms of mental illness, has become more talked about openly in society. And I did not realize that I suffered dreadfully from anxiety. And at the time in 2013, what had happened was, I had my breakdown. Helen and I had been together for so 5 years at that point. No, yeah, 5 years at that point in time. And I was very happy, but it wasn't until I went through the breakdown, was able to, thanks to a lot of great counseling with both psychiatrists, including medication involved to help me with the depression and the anxiety, and counseling with a brilliant psychologist who I name in the book, Peter Casbolt in Sydney, was I able to um, exorcise a lot of those demons, get those monkeys off my back once and for all. So now I'm in a place where I look at the work, whilst I can still, of course, get anxious, anyone can, because anxiety is part of our nature. Anxiety is what gives us that fight or flight um, thought process. Like if we're about to cross the road, we think to ourselves, stop and look at to see if there's a car coming, or if you're about to get run over by a bus, you jump out of the way. That's part of anxiety. It's a survival technique. But it's when that anxiety gets way out of proportion that you do have, those issues of which eventually led to me having a breakdown. So I got to, so now, and I'm sorry if I haven't answered your question properly. When I found Helen, I'd found love, or when we found each other, I had found love for the first time, true love for the first time in my life. And it was in 2013, after the breakdown, after I came out the other side of that, that I truly became in love with myself, accepting of who I am, accepting of myself, warts and all. So not wanting to continually wish to be somebody else or something else. I like who I am. I'm comfortable in my own skin.
Yeah.
And my beautiful Helen just brought me a cup of tea, which I'm going to sip away on as we have a chat. So I hope you don't mind. Go ahead.
It's fine. Now you mentioned quite near the end of your book about seeing a doctor that you called Dr. Knob Jockey.
Yeah, yeah, Dr. Knob Jockey.
And you needed to, see somebody, and your doctor referred you to someone. And you mentioned in his book mentioned a book that was a complete nut job. How did that go with?
Well, that was obviously, these are all things in my opinion. Dr. Knob Jockey does not know that's his name. But at the time, as part of dwarfism, unfortunately, it is very common to have spinal issues,
Yeah,
purely because of our physicality. There is compression of the nerves in the spine, and often that has to be relieved. And this all happened around 2000, 2001 that you're referring to. My marriage had just ended, so I'd been through the
yeah,
ugliness of all of that. I had had my first lot of spinal surgeries. So again, I wasn't. I basically had the shits with the world. I wasn't in a relationship. I didn't think I was ever going to find love, and I went to my GP and said, "Look, I really need something to help me take the edge off because I'm just not feeling great about my life at the moment." And he said, "That's fine, but I'd like you to go see our in-house psychiatrist." And when I walked into this guy's room, you could just feel his arrogance and his sense of superiority. It's just like, oh God, what am I doing here? And how that went, what you're referring to, is I sat down and he said, "Okay, firstly, I'd like to get some history on you." Okay. Where else is there a history of dwarfism in your family? There's not. There has to be. So he started this argument with me about the history of dwarfism. Now, yes, it is true that once, like, I am the start of that genetic chain, if you like, where dwarfism shows up in the genes, but it has to start. I'm not a scientist, but I think, geneticists could tell you this. It has to start somewhere. So I am the start of that dwarf gene in our family. So had I had children, which I chose not to do, 10 generations down the track, and it showed up again, they could turn back and go, well, that was great, 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 great grandfather Lofty who had dwarfism. That's where this comes from. So they could make the connection. I'm the start of that chain. But to this guy's mind, no, it had to be somewhere else. And because it wasn't, he said, well, how do you, any chance that your parents aren't your real parents? And when I told, and this is a guy who was supposed to be helping me with my mental health,
Yeah.
not making it worse, my anger was going through the roof. And I just stood up, grabbed my bag, pointed at him, and said, think about it. It's got to start somewhere. It starts with me. And I just left. And but he was just such a dick. I went back to my GP and just said, look, this is what happened when I went and saw this guy. I'd be really careful about referring people to him. And to his credit, my doctor apologized on behalf of the practice, saying, I'm really sorry that you had that experience. And I've noted that that's what has happened, because it shouldn't have happened. This guy was a health professional who was supposed to be helping me with my mental health, not making it worse. And by making people angry, you're not doing a great deal for their mental health.
Um, Now you did mention this when we had our interview with the streamers of
Mm-hmm.
how you wanted to be a chef, and now you're the voiceover for MasterChef. Would you say that MasterChef is probably the most watched cooking show like in the world, or
I I would say that, and it's actually been proven. And people might think to themselves, well, there's lots of Master Chefs. There's Master Chef India, there's Master Chef America, there's Master Chef England. The one that we are talking about is Master Chef Australia. That particular program is the most watched cooking program in the world, and I have the very great privilege, and something I'm extremely proud of, to be the narrator for that show. So I introduce the show each time and I wrap it up, pointing to what's coming towards next. And the beauty of it, Haim, as you mentioned, is I wanted to be a chef when I was younger, and I was so determined to be a chef until it became an impossibility for me. I did work experience in high school. I don't know if that's a term that you're familiar with or something you're
yeah,
still doing these
yeah,
days. Um, where you have where you get placed in a workplace of a career that you would really like to be involved in. And it became obvious during that week of work experience in a commercial kitchen in a hotel in Launceston down in Tasmania, where I was from, that with all the bench heights and the depth of everything and commercial kitchens needing to be as big as they are, it just simply wasn't going to work for me. So, yeah, it kind of came full circle that I couldn't be a chef, but now I narrate the most watched cooking program in the world. And it's a great show. Helen and I used to watch it. I only became involved from season 6 onwards. A very dear friend of mine, Nick Mackay, was the original narrator, but he had an offer to do something else, which he couldn't refuse, really. It was a brilliant offer, and of course he took it, which made way for me to be able to slip into the role. And the one that we've just wrapped up, which was 2020 MasterChef Australia Back to Win, featured returning contestants from previous seasons who had done well but not won. And yeah, was just amazing. So Helen and I get to work on it and watch it, so I enjoy it both ways.
and
It's
now
really awesome.
the new season of Junior MasterChef is coming out very soon, which I got to say I'm very excited for that it's coming back.
I am so looking forward to that as well. I loved the first Junior Master Chef, and I don't know if I'll be working on that one yet. I haven't
Yeah,
been told. They may go with a younger voice on it. Who knows? But yeah, I'm so looking forward, because just from the teasers that we've seen,
yeah,
that have gone to air. I saw this one particular scene where I think it was Jock and Melissa, or Jock and Andy, talking to this young uh, young junior master chef who was competing, saying, so what are you making? And he's reeled off all of these things, or I can't quite remember now, that seasoned professional chefs would only really know how to do. And it just made your head spin. It's like, and how old are you? 11. It's like, yeah, so these kids are just amazing. I'm so looking forward to that season.
and
So looking forward to it.
one other thing that you mentioned was this was after your marriage and about your gambling addiction and how that
Yep.
all affected in your life. So
Yeah. It's I My father, it's funny, addiction does have a history in my family. My father was an alcoholic. He was also
Yeah,
a chronic gambler. And I grew up seeing the effects of that and thought, okay, that's never going to be me. But unfortunately, I developed a very serious addiction to poker machines, which have had an impact on many, many people's lives, unfortunately. And people think that, and I'm not putting myself in the brainy category, don't get me wrong, but people think that those who have an addiction are stupid or dumb people. That's not the case. You can see some incredibly accomplished professional people with serious addictions, and addiction is a serious issue in all its forms, whether it's drug addiction, alcoholic addiction, gambling addiction, and so many other forms of addiction. I'm not making excuses for them, please don't get me wrong, but it took me a while to fight my way out of that. And it was with the help of a very, very good program run by St. Vincent's Private Hospital here in Sydney, or I was in Sydney at the time. I now live on the South Coast, that I was able to kick that addiction. It took a lot of work, took a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, as the saying goes. And by then, I'd lost a lot of money on poker machines and done myself a lot of financial damage. But the first thing that anybody with an addiction has got to do is want to change. It's not something that somebody can do for you, irrespective of what the addiction is you're dealing with. You've got to want to make that change, and it's you who's got to take that
yeah,
first step.
yeah,
So, yeah.
yeah,
But addiction is a hideous thing because it doesn't just impact the person who's addicted, but particularly in the case of marriages and families, it has a devastating effect on them as well. So,
yeah. Um, Now you mentioned towards the that you made a friend who helped stop the bullying for
oh
you.
yeah,
Um, so would you mind telling us about who that friend was?
no, not at all. And I'm not sure what we called him in the book, and I can't use his real name, unfortunately. Um, but how this came about, and I had been enduring this bullying. Thankfully, I was never physically bullied because at the time that I was going to school, it was still a it was still a time of corporal punishment, I think is the correct term.
Yeah,
Capital punishment is when they obviously sentence somebody to death, but corporal punishment, where you could get the cane or the strap and all those forms of punishment that people of my generation would be familiar with,
yeah,
was still in schools. And so bullies generally often are gutless. They only bully somebody because they have a power over them. They will not bully somebody who's more powerful than them, or somebody who's equally as powerful as them, because you know it. There is a fear in them to say that they may suffer as a result of their bullying. And what happened was, one weekend I was at home and I looked out our lounge room window, and there was a family who were moving this guy's oldest sister into an apartment over the road. And I never had an issue with him. Um, I think we called him Stan. Um, that's not his name, but we'll call him Stan for the purposes of this. Um, as I say, I'd never had an issue with Stan, but he was reputed as being the toughest kid in the school that nobody wanted to take on. So I just simply wandered over and said, "Hey, Stan, you know, hi, Ian, how you doing?" And I said, "Would you guys like a hand?" I helped them unload the trailer, and in an hour or so, it was all done. And I thought, okay, well, I'll see him at school again, but because he's the toughest kid in school, he's not likely to acknowledge me. That following Monday, he came up to me and he said, "Bob the bully teases you, doesn't he?" I said, "Yeah." And this was halfway through year 10, and the everyday bullying started pretty much first couple of weeks of year 7. So this is like 3.5 years I've been putting up with this. And he said to me, "Tell me when he does it again, because I don't like him and I'm going to have him." Now, I'm not condoning violence, but this is what happened. I didn't actually see it happen, but Stan related it to me, and I know it happened because I got teased every day. and it just stopped dead in its tracks. No one dared call me that name again. He came to me the next day and he said, don't worry, it's not going to happen again. I said, well, what happened? And he said, oh, Bob the bully and his mates were walking down the corridor, sort of like sauntering down. And anyone who's been in high school knows what the kids who think they're so cool, how they prance around the place. And Stan by himself came the other way, walked straight through about 4 or 5 of these kids, grabbed Bob on the way through, slammed him right against the locker and said, you've been teasing my friend Ian Fulton. Bob went to jelly, as all bullies who are gutless do, going, because he knew that Stan was going to beat the crap out of him, or he feared he was. He said, I haven't. No, I haven't. It's not true. He said, you have. I know it. Next time you do, I'm going to have you. And, of course, all Bob's mates were standing there watching this happen. None of them were prepared to step in because they knew that they could get hurt themselves. And it stopped that day. And I'll be forever grateful to him for doing that, because it just meant that I could go through those last 6 months of school without getting bullied every day. It, to a great deal, in a lot of ways, saved my sanity.
Now, one final thing I want to ask is, I'm sure everyone is curious in how you got the name Lofty.
Oh, okay.
Right.
Yeah. Well, given how young you are and how young a lot of people who will be watching this or listening to this will be, there was a TV series many, many moons ago. Well, when I say many moons ago, back in the 1970s, early 80s, it was called It Ain't Half Hot, Mum. And it was about soldiers who were performers who would go around performing to entertain the troops. And there was a little guy in that. He didn't have dwarfism, but he was very short. And his name was Lofty. And then when I started my first radio job down in Burnie on the northwest coast of Tasmania, I was changing shifts. And how you change shifts back then is the guy before you would vacate the seat during the last song. You'd settle in, get yourself ready, and be good to go at the top of the hour, so to speak. And as he signed off, he said, oh, I'll see you tomorrow, and Lofty's next. And he turned off the microphone, and I said, what? I said, Lofty. He said, that's what I'm going to call you. And he explained where it was from. And because it was a name that was never given with any hurtful intent, it was never born out of malice, I was happy for it to stick. And it has. It's served me very well in my career.
Yeah.
So that is one person I can name. Rob Bean, I am very grateful to you for giving me the name Lofty. It's served me really well.
Yeah. Well, Lofty, thank you so much for joining me today for this interview, and it's been a real pleasure talking to you today.
Hamish, thank you for the opportunity to chat to you. Thank you for inviting me. It's been a real honor. I really appreciate it.